Welcome everyone to our second Tech Captain podcast. This time we are lucky to have Colin Eberhardt, I hope I pronounce it well, with us, with more than 20 years in the industry. And as usual now we have Gareth joining us to do the interview and bring another perspective to this discussion. Hi Gareth.
Hi guys, hi Ron, hi Colin. Good to meet you.
So, Colin, I'd like to go straight into the topic and ask you if you can maybe tell us more about the previous roles that shaped you. I know you spend lots of time at Scott Logic now, but
Yeah,
before you tell us more about this experience, maybe what you've done before and how it led you to where you are today.
sure. Yeah, so I guess I didn't start out in life looking to be a programmer or a computer scientist. I studied physics at university, and the first job that I got out of university was a little bit different. I was a microscope designer, so I was combining mechanical engineering, optical engineering, electronic engineering, various different disciplines. And I guess in terms of things that shaped my career, I think spending some time doing non-software engineering, I think has given me a slightly different perspective than if I'd been a career software engineer. So that was the first job that I had. Although one of the positives of that was it's an interesting discipline. You get to experience so many different things. However, microscope designer, there aren't many places that need
You're the
microscope
first one I've
designers.
ever met.
Exactly. There were a sum total of two companies I could work for in the whole of the UK. And beyond that, there were a few in Germany. And I got to a point in my life where I wanted to live where I wanted to live and then find work in that area, which is why I was reasonably competent, self-taught programmer. I thought, well, that's the obvious career to take. There are software jobs everywhere. And this was even before a lot of remote working was the norm. Pretty much any city you travel to in any country, you can find software engineering work. So I took a choice to move into software, and that's allowed me to stay in the northeast of England rather than living in London. I live by the seaside, so I've picked the place that I want to live, and I've never looked back. The first company I worked for was a company where we were designing medical systems, sort of medical IT systems, which was really good because it meant I went from being a bit of a software hacker on the side to being in an organization where there was quite a rigorous process for software development because the systems we were developing were quite critical. So I was only there for a few years, but I learned a huge amount about the rigor that goes into writing software rather than the hacking that I used to do on the side. And then following that, joined Scott Logic Consultancy, and I've been there for about 16 years now. So that's been a huge part of my career.
Yeah, that's what I saw, and that's what really struck me when I prepared this interview to see that you've been at Scott Logic for 17 years, and in today it's quite unusual to have somebody staying even more than 2.5 years in the same job. So can you tell us what you are doing and why do you love it that much? What's happened that makes you spend that time there? What's so great about it?
Yeah, well, Scott Logic, for starters, is a software consultancy. So rather than being in most product companies, you work on one product or a suite of products, and they may evolve slowly over time. Whereas working as a consultant, your job can be different one day to the next, maybe not quite so frequently as that. I mean, we tend to move projects on a maybe monthly or yearly sort of timescale. So there's a huge amount of variety. I've worked on web projects, server projects, messaging platforms. I've developed mobile applications, done all sorts of things, used things like AI technologies, steered clear of blockchain, thankfully. But there's a huge amount of variety to be had within consultancy. And I guess the other thing that's kept me at Scott Logic is I joined when there were about 15 people there. There are now close to 500. So we're a company that's growing steadily, and I was fortunate enough to join the company at a relatively early stage. So I'm now part of
Yeah, you're
the.
basically a founder.
Yeah, exactly. Whilst I wasn't quite there to be a founder, I'm close enough to be part of the management team now, and that has its own set of challenges, which again are just interesting to me. I like tackling new challenges, which is to your point. This is why a lot of people move from one company to another. It's to find a new challenge. I'm lucky that I work in a company where new challenges present themselves, so I don't have to move jobs.
Do you find? I mean, are you hands on in any of the projects at all now, or is that really just not possible?
Not not much, very little. I occasionally come in a sort of advisory capacity. I do keep hands on, and that's something that is very important to me. But typically, that's within open source. So I tend to, at least maybe not every day these days, but at least every week I'm writing some code for something. It's just I'm probably not the person to have on the critical path for any client delivery. So it is important to me to remain hands-on, and part of that is from some past experiences working with some, I guess, enterprise architects whose decision making I thought was not terribly good because they were so distant from how computers actually work. Whilst I would not say that architects have to write code, I think still understanding how things work, or at least understanding where you meet the limits of your knowledge, and you should probably talk to someone who's closer to the code, probably younger than yourself. So it's important to me to remain hands on.
It's actually interesting because I noticed obviously you seem to be quite a strong open source advocate in the financial services community. So I'm wondering, what are the sort of obstacles there? Because there's obviously compliance is a big thing. And then I seem to remember, I think it's less so now because I think, under their new CEO, Microsoft has sort of embraced open source, but there was a lot of stuff spoken about how it was less secure. I mean, it was nonsense really. So I'm just wondering, what's your experience now?
Yeah, and you're right to sort of point to the financial services because as an industry, they are behind, and they are provably behind. I ran a research project with Linux Foundation last year where we looked at open source across Europe, and we also looked at how open source differs between sectors. And financial services, insurance, and the public sector are all laggards when it comes to both open source consumption and open source contribution. And you're right, compliance is one challenge that they have. So from a compliance perspective, there's a lot of communications which must be recorded for regulatory and audit purposes. And there are some technology challenges which make that challenging when communicating through things like GitHub and so on. To be honest, that's a bit of an excuse because any technologist will look at that problem and say, yeah, I can probably build something that will fix that problem. The bigger problem has always been the value proposition and the fear of leaking IP. So value proposition is just understanding the benefit of using open source technologies and understanding the ecosystem and the benefits that it brings. And the fear of leaking IP is simply that the financial services sector has for a long time been quite guarded about their code and their IP. And again, it's an understanding thing. They don't. One of the conversations I have again and again is the vast majority of the stuff you're doing is things like Kubernetes. There's no IP wrapped up in Kubernetes, which is specific to the financial services. Maybe 1% of your code base represents some genuine IP, and yes, you should guard that closely. But the vast majority of it, well, again, being a consultant, I move from client to client, and I look at it and go, "You're building the same thing as that other bank over there. It's not that unique." So it is getting better, but I think the key to it all is understanding the value proposition. Because if you don't understand the value of open source, then you're not motivated to tackle some of the obstacles, whether they're real or even imagined obstacles.
And I have some questions about, like, to go back to the agency Scott Logic, like myself. So we all CTOs here, like, and on LinkedIn, like every week at least I would have some agency in some country of the world called messaging me. There's a lot of tech agencies today, so many, like, but they're usually smallish or huge, like huge corporates of like dozens of
Yep.
thousands of people, or small ones of up to 20, 30, maybe 50 people. Like you guys have grew to hundreds of people, more than 400, if I'm correct.
Yep.
What is your secret? Well, what's so special about it?
Well, as you can imagine, there's no real secret. I mean, a lot of it is well, the funny thing is, you talk to any consultancy and they'll say that quality and expertise. Everyone has quality and expertise, but really, most don't have the kind of quality and expertise that you might wish for, and that is the most important thing to Scott Logic, that we do a fantastic job on each and every engagement. And unfortunately, as consultancies grow and scale, they do start to compromise, because growing and scaling is hard. Finding the quality of consultant, the quality engineers to join your organization is hard, and it's easy to compromise in order to grow. We're not going to make that compromise, which is why a consultancy of 500 people, it sounds quite big, but it took us 17 years to get there. I can point to other consultancy organizations that have reached that number in the space of a few years, because they've had funding, they've just gone out and hired huge quantities of people. So we're in it for the long term. We're going to continue to grow steadily by not compromising on quality, expertise. And also, sort of almost secondary to that is, we also try to have a fairly sort of unique feel to Scott Logic. So we want our consultants to be sort of expert advisors to our clients. Not saying yes to the clients, knowing when is the right time to challenge and how to challenge properly. We bring innovation, but also we make sure that we're pragmatists at the same time. So I make a kind of joke about blockchain. We'd not recommend blockchain to anyone, because whereas many other consultancies will ride the hype wave and generate more revenues, but in the long term they're going to end up with a whole bunch of clients who are wishing they never picked that technology. So it's not an easy question to answer in one go. There's not one thing that makes us unique. It's a combination of lots and lots of things, which is again why it's difficult to guard, to defend all of these principles as you grow, but we're trying.
Are you giving away free Newcastle brown ale, right?
Yeah.
Direct line to the brewery or something like that.
No, we've not tried that gimmick yet. Funnily enough, it's not. People don't drink it much around here. I was surprised to find one of the first times I went to America and I didn't expect many of them to know Newcastle. They went, "Oh yeah, the beer. Yeah, the beer's great." It's like, yeah, no one drinks it back home.
But that's interesting what you said, Colin, about the advising the client and be able to push back on what they say, because that's something that not many people do, because they are too scared of losing the business, or because they are too inexperienced or immature and they can't take that stance. And that's something, like, how do you approach that? Because you don't always know how the client is going to react to you pushing back on some of their demands, because they don't make sense from a technological point of view.
Yep. It's really challenging. I think saying no in the right way, or at least, but I think that's one of the hardest things as a consultant, because one of the things that I talk to our team about quite a lot is you have to have empathy with the client. There are many instances where I've been into an organization and I looked at their technology and looked at their decisions. I think, God, this is terrible. And then I talk to the people and think, these people are really quite smart. And it's far too easy to look at terrible technology and blame the people that are in the room, blame the people that are still, maintaining that system. You have to understand that often there'll be a history, there'll be a story behind it, which is why they're in that situation. And also, people become, to a certain extent, institutionalized. Once you've lived with a certain technology or product for a number of years, it becomes quite hard to be critical of what you already have. So you have to be very careful about how you say no. You have to do it from a position of empathy and understanding. And even no is probably the wrong way to express it. It's more about, I understand why the technology is in the current state it is. I understand the forces that have brought you to this position. We believe that rather than investing further in the current technology, there's another way. This is the path to a better future. And if you explain it with empathy and without creating a situation of conflict, it's always well received. But you've also got to be prepared to compromise. You may collectively reach a conclusion that yes, there is a better way, but that might have to wait a year. It might have to wait until they have budgets, or it might have to wait until a more appropriate time in the
Yeah, no, that's
evolution of
very
their
clear. And
platform.
like, but how do you deal like with so many different tech stacks? Because you have like dozens of projects at the same time, probably, plus the ones you
Yeah.
maintain or you provide support for. Like, how do you maintain so many different tech stacks, or do you specialize in one?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We don't specialize in a particular tech stack, and we've also uh, been shied away from technology partnerships because, again, technology partnerships often result in consultancies going in the wrong direction. You get to the point where if you have a commercial agreement with Microsoft, then all of a sudden Microsoft is the solution to every problem. We don't want to do that, so we don't have those types of partnership. But it does mean that we end up working in a wide range of languages, a wide range of frameworks. But I guess the way I see it is a lot of the skills are transferable. You can take someone who's experienced in C sharp, and they will become competent in Java within a modest amount of time. Now that's not quite the same as having years of experience and years of knowledge around the whole ecosystem, but there are a whole load of skills which are transferable. It's the same maybe true with databases, for example. Once you're familiar with the concepts of a relational database, you can transfer your skills from, I don't know, MySQL to Oracle relatively easily. And again, I'm not for 1 minute going to say that there isn't a need for some of the deep expertise that you get over a period of years. So this is the principle we generally operate on. Our consultants do move from one tech stack to another. However, as they become more experienced, they do develop deep specialisms. So delivering a project is often requires finding possibly one or two people with deep specialist experience, and then a collection of people who have skills that are transferable for that particular project. And I practice what I preach as well. I mean, I've programmed in Swift, Objective C, Java, C Sharp, JavaScript, TypeScript. I've done almost 10 different languages and delivered projects with those languages.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good programmer, certainly in a high level language, can probably transition between different languages. I mean, the thing when you're hiring, it's always, you have to get something done very quickly. So you want someone with the experience who you can drop in versus someone who you're going to retain, who you're going to build as part of your team. And probably I'm guessing a lot of your guys really like the fact that they get to work on lots of different things and learn lots of different tech.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons people, a certain type of people, like to work on within consultancies, because there's always something different and new around the corner, and it might be a different technology or it may be a different domain. You may end up doing financial services work 1 week and then work for a public sector organization the next, and that's what I find interesting. And I know it's not for everyone. Some people like to work on a particular product and platform and see it from sort of genesis through to massive growth, and that's absolutely fine. And that's one of the things that can be challenging with consultancies. building something and then not sticking around to watch it grow. That can be a bit of a shame, but I still prefer the variety that you get as a consultant.
So what advice would you give someone starting their tech career today? I mean, I'm guessing you probably bring in interns and stuff into an organization of that size. But if someone's just graduated university or even just leaving school, thinking about doing computer science,
yeah, I would. If it's in terms of, I think it's important to find a job that helps you develop as a person. So that's the step that I took in my first software job. It was making sure that the people that were interviewing me and the people that were around me were people that I looked at and thought, yeah, I could learn from you. So part of it is seniority, making sure that there's some senior people above you, but also as part of the interview, I wanted to see what their personality was like. I wanted to see whether they were the types of people that I could learn from. And I was quite fortunate. I think the first job I landed in had a really great learning culture, and I think that's tremendously important. So I'd always recommend in your first job, you're on a continuing learning journey. It's not learn, get a job. It's learn, get a job, and learn a whole lot more. Yeah,
keep learning.
absolutely.
You don't ever stop.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I would say with this business is that the pace of everything is continually accelerating. So you have to be upskilling yourself all the time, or it's just very easy to become not irrelevant, just not be able to grasp. Especially in your business where you're recommending solutions, right? You need to have an understanding of what the cutting edge is. You're not always going to recommend it, but you need to know what it is. So,
I tend to recommend just behind the cutting edge, but you're right. You do need to keep an eye on the cutting edge and the bleeding edge. But yeah, you're right. I do think technology seems to be evolving ever faster. Although the one thing that kind of bugs me is, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this one. So with the technology advances, we've got new frameworks, things like microservice patterns. Surely we should be able to build software projects faster than we used to in the past. But I look back at what I was doing, I don't know, 15 years ago when it was app servers and Java applications, and it was a whole lot simpler. We didn't have so many choices. But I'm sure that projects took roughly the same amount of time. I think we sort of compensate for the advances in technology by making things more complicated for ourselves. I think there's almost a law in that.
I agree. I agree with you. I think techies like to make it more complex to show they are smarter. There's two technologies that do the same, but they want to say, "Oh, why did you choose that one, the number A? Why not the letter B?" But they do exactly the same just to show that they know the other one better. I think it's just an industry thing. But I think also many of these technologies were created more for collaboration on large scale, but it's not faster. Like the fastest thing is to make a PHP page and drag and drop in FileZilla in your FTP server.
But I think the other thing too is I've had in mind to write an article, my next article, which I was going to call "The Fallacy of Fixed Frameworks" because I like alliteration. But also, I just you continually read this thing that first of all it's microservices. Now we're talking about going back to monoliths, a modular, then it's serverless, and then it's there's always something that's being pushed as the latest. And this is the solution you should go down on. You should be agile, you should be waterfall, you should try Kanban. But oftentimes it's what the best fit is for the organization, right? It's not a prescribed formula that always works, but we seem to like inventing new ones in this industry. That's what, to Ron's point, I think.
Yeah, very true. Very true. We almost precisely compensate for any advances which makes things simpler by inventing some new complexity. And as a result, building, I don't know, let's take an example. Building an ERP system, I think probably takes exactly the same amount of time now as it did 15, 20 years ago, even though theoretically it shouldn't, surely. But yeah, it's an odd one.
Probably. Well, I think we will conclude on this thought and open-ended questions. Thank you so much, Colin, for your time.
Yeah, no worries. Good to meet you both.
Likewise. And for everybody listening, Gareth and I will be back in 2 weeks every Tuesday.
Thanks, Colin.
Thank
Nice to
you.
meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.